Samsudin has just established his own political party now. So yeah, and then I don't know. Probably if he has a chance. I know that he has. Yeah, he's right. I know that he has had his political ambition since he was also a member of Golkar at that time. You been to all of the Pacific?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heidi Isabel, and welcome to the Professor Jaya Yusman Auditorium LSPR Sudirman Park campus. It's a pleasure for me to be your master of ceremony for today LSPR Omni session with Professor Mike Hardy, discussing about emerging threats to security, international crime, and great power rivalry. First of all, I would like to welcome to our honorable guest speaker for today, Professor Mike Hardy, Board Director and Chair of the International Leadership Association, Chair of Intercultural Relations, and Founding Director of the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations at Coventry University, UK. Welcome, Professor Mike Hardy. To Mr. Yosef Wahyu Kurniawan, Assistant Head of Undergraduate Program for International Relation Communication Studies, the respective lecturers for International Crime and Global Security, Mr. Rudi Sukandar, PhD, Mr. Zaman Syah, PhD, and Dr. Randes Hadi Santoso, MA. Welcome to all the lecturers. And to all students here in the auditorium, and also to all participants who join us virtually through LSPR YouTube channel. Welcome and thank you so much for joining today LSPR Omni Sessions with Professor Mike Hardy. LSPR Omni is LSPR initiative to balance the students' online and offline academic learning in addressing the new normal environment. This is similar to LSPR lecture exchange program, but due to the travel restrictions that we need to adapt, we want to still make this available for LSPR students online. LSPR Omni is a great opportunity for LSPR students to broaden their knowledge and gain an international perspective of communications where LSPR Omni enables LSPR students in taking learning beyond borders. LSPR Omni is similar to our LSPR lecture exchange program, and we wanted to continue the implementations by making this available online. But now, there are already many adjustments for the travel restrictions, and we are slowly adapting to the new normal situations of post-pandemic. We are starting to resume again some of our offline events, and this is the first LSPR Omni's offline sessions, and we are really grateful for the opportunity, and we do hope we will have more and better situations to able to meet face-to-face again. We are pleased to have Professor Mike Hardy today with us here at LSPR, and we will have presentation sessions from Professor Mike Hardy and followed by discussion and Q&A sessions with our moderator for today, Dr. Rudi Sukandar. And now, please allow me to invite our moderator for today. Mr. Rudi Sukandar, PhD, is one of the lecturers for International Crime and Global Security, and he is also the Director of Postgraduate Thesis Department and the Director of LSPR Center for Research, Publications, and Community Service. Without any further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Rudi Sukandar to the stage.
Thank you, Heidi. Hello, everyone. I think I'm just gonna, since I'm a bit quite a distance from you, I can just take off my mask then. You're not allowed though. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our auditorium today. I think we are honored, or should I say privileged, to have Professor Mike Hardy to be able to share his knowledge and then his take on some of the issues that we have been talking in our classes. I think we've been talking about transnational crime and global security for the past 10 weeks now, right? Anyone's from Pak Zarmansah's class, please raise your hand. Okay, you're at the back. Okay, Pak Hadi's class. Oh, here on the left, and my class. All right, we got a lot. All right, before asking Professor Mike Hardy to be on stage to do the presentation, I would like to introduce him first. Professor Mike Hardy is the board director and the chair of International Leadership Association, chair of Intercultural Relations and founding directors of the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations at Coventry University. Professor Hardy has a senior leader, or was a senior leader with the British Councils, responsible for the Council's global programs, for intercultural dialogue, youth engagement, and global strategic partnership. More than one way is that Professor Mike and I have crossed paths in the past, and then I think for the past few months that we have been working closely together on doing something that I would like to tell you later. So Professor Mike has been twice honored in the UK, awarded the Officer of the Order of British Empire in 2001 for his peace-building work in the Middle East, and appointed a Companion of Honor of St. Michael's and St. George, CMG, in Her Majesty Queen's Birthday Honors, June 2010, for his work internationally in intercultural dialogue. And then Professor Mike Hardy has also published on Identity, Future Next Exit in 2009, and Future Agenda, the work in 2020, and on innovation and vulnerability, inclusive innovation for sustainable development in 2016, published by London and Palgrave with Imogen Baylis and Harris Bider. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. On another news, I would also like to share the good news that with Dr. Shafiq, one of our lecturers at LSPR, Professor Mike Hardy and I, and Dr. Habib from ULAB, Bangladesh, that we will be having our publication this month. Hopefully it will publish. We'll be talking about how the tourism industries cope with the COVID-19 pandemic based on the cases that we have in Bali. So if you have a chance later to read our paper, then will be published probably late this month. So I think on the last one, and Professor Mike also completed a major review of literature on cohesive societies for the British Academy in 2019. So I think please just give a round of applause for Professor Mike to start your presentation. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudy, and for your kind comments. And
I'll be back to the stage later.
that's fine. Yes, I'm going to stand up because if I sit down, I might go to sleep. The wonderful host here has made me work very hard, so I just might snooze. But it's very pleased to be here, and it's not my first time. I hope I've seen some of you before, perhaps, but my first visit to the London School was in 2004, a long time, dulu, and I was very pleased to be associated with the initial inauguration of the building. This is a very special place for me. And so thank you for giving your time. But the second reason that I'm very pleased to be here is that I'm being asked to talk about things that matter to me, that are important. And I know from your studies that they're important to you too. So my current work at the moment, my academic work, is divided into two areas that I bring together. First, I'm passionate and believe strongly that the world needs better leadership, that our leaders are failing us, that they're not fit for purpose. Many are good, many are reasonable, but they're not brilliant, they're not excellent. And we need, in our complicated world, excellent leadership. So that's my one work, and I'm working now on a book for Cambridge University Press, which is looking at the quality of leadership in our world. My second interest is in peace and security, and I've spent most of my working life working on peace building and understanding better the process of peace in our time. So my current convergence of my two interests are looking at the leadership for peace. Do our leaders understand peace and security well enough to make them happen? Can we build a safer world that is better for our families and our communities? Or do we just bounce from one crisis to the next? Do our leaders simply react? Or can they take control of the future? And I'll share some of my thinking on that. So Dr. Prita Kamalgani asked me to give an omni on an interest that I have and that you share. So I'm going to look at emerging threats to security. And I'm going to describe my thinking about where we are in the world. And the world is a difficult place. In 2022, it's a different place than it was in 2021. And because it's different context, the challenges for leaders has changed as well. So I'm going to look at 5 things in my presentation. I'll try not to be too long because I want to have your questions and answers and discussions with Pat Rudy. I'm going to look firstly at new and emerging issues and threats. 2022 is different. And as students, you need to be clear what the difference is. Why is it different now than it was last year? Our MC talked about the new normal, how we're getting back together after 2.5 years of separation. We won't be going back to how we were before. The new normal will be new. So I'm going to look at how it's going to be new. I'm going to look briefly at the human security landscape, I call it. This is a discipline in study that I know you've been looking at, of how the world can organize itself better so that we can have more security and safety for our families and our communities. Then I'm going to look at positive peace. I don't just want peace that results from removing conflict. It's not the antidote to war. I want peace that's permanent. That is our normal state of affairs. Historically, most peace has come about when we've solved our problems and removed the conflict. And I want to look at the work we're doing now that looks at peace as a positive thing, important in its own right. And I want to then make reference to some of the security threats that you've been studying, some of the real difficulties that exist in 2022 that are difficult to solve. Tomorrow I've been invited to talk to the Indonesian Police Science Institute, and I'll be sharing some of my research with them. They're concerned too. Do they understand the problems of insecurity so that they can help? I'm very pleased that the Indonesia Police Academy is so interested in thinking about the challenges. It's good that our police are thinking police, not just doing. And I'll finish by looking at what this means for the future. If I speak too quickly, then stand up and wave your hands and I'll slow down. So 2 things in the emerging issues and threats in my research. The first, I'm really interested in doing much more work, and that's watching how the world is changing, what I call the changing world order. And it's pretty gloomy, it's pretty bad, it's pretty disappointing. At the moment we have problems of energy crisis, we have problems of inflation, we have growing hunger, poverty. 2 million young people in my country, in the United Kingdom, a very wealthy country. 2 million children are living in poverty now, this year. This cannot be acceptable. And after the pandemic, many more million people in Indonesia are struggling without enough food, without enough security. But there's other changes in the world taking place at what I call the Great Power level. We have a war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, which is not just a war between 2 countries. It's a war between great powers. We have rivalry between the United States and China. These are big changes, and I'm going to look at some of those in more detail. And my second part, I'm going to look at some of the local security threats that we have, the breakdown in law and order, how in many countries for women, it's dangerous to be out in the streets by themselves late at night. This is not acceptable, but it's more a problem now than it's been in the past. There's many more crime and international crime across borders. So we suffer now from transnational crime that you've been studying, I know. We still have terrorism. We have people who will move from one part of the world to another part of the world to do people harm, to campaign for their own particular political ideology. We have corporates, private sector companies and governments who are corrupt everywhere. There's no place in any country that I've visited where there isn't corruption, there isn't stealing and unfair practices in government and in corporate sector. And we have also technology that's changed. We have the internet, which brings us freedom to share, but vulnerability from dark forces and the dark web that I'm sure you know about and have to be careful about. And we have criminals who will use the internet to empty your bank account and change all your transactions and point them to their own bank accounts. So it's a pretty dismal world that we're in. And I will be a little more optimistic later. But let's be clear that we have a challenging time for peace and security. So I won't spend too long on all the details. And these slides, I'm sure, can be available to you to study more carefully. But if I were to ask you, if we had a longer session, maybe we had a seminar for 1 week, and we discussed what are the major changes in the world, what would your list be? This is my list. Okay? We have what I call a fragmenting world. We have a world that's not joining up, that's actually dismantling into little bits. And that makes it dangerous. There's no longer one single hyperpower. The world was a bit safer after the Cold War when the United States became the Pax America, we called it. The peace that's brought about by having one supreme country which involved with its capitalist system, its market economy through trade. But that's changed. We now no longer have a single hyperpower. We have a really big, strong rivalry between the United States and China. Both will tell you they have the best solution for humankind in the future, but they're very different. I make no judgment about which is the best and which is the worst. I observe we have two, and this is rivalry. The second on my list is always the concern about the mass movement of people. You've had in your own history in Indonesia, the transmigrasi. You've had a movement of people from one part of your wonderful country to another. At the present time, we have 80 million people, 80 million people on the move, who have had to leave their homes because of conflict, because of climate, or because of opportunity, and no work. This is a really big problem that the world has because we don't like people when they move. We find it very threatening when people arrive in our communities from different places, with different clothes, with different food, with different languages, with different religions. We don't manage difference very well. Actually, Indonesia is one of the best examples of a highly diverse country through unity and diversity, through its commitment to Pancasila, that actually does manage difference a bit better. You have 300 different tribes, you have several hundred languages, and you manage to live as one nation. There are many countries that don't have that success, that have conflict between black and white, between newcomers and old residents. The mass movement of people doesn't mean that the world is open. There's lots of problems of how you move from A to B, from this country to that country. But we do have open borders. We do have many more people traveling as tourists, visiting for business. We have the internet. We have Hollywood and Bollywood that we share on Netflix and online. The world is open. And that creates as many problems as it brings benefits. The reaction to this openness and this movement of people and this rivalry is that we've become, as people, as members of the world community, we've become defensive. And the political movements that take place as a result, we call populist. So people start saying, let's have a political party that is anti-immigration, that's anti-Chinese, that's anti-Hollywood, that's anti-capitalism. So we have a political capture to attract popular support, to bring leaders to power. And populism is a problem because it generates prejudice, dislike, and conflict. We had a movement in my university in Coventry where young people would say, look, you old people should move aside. Let us rule the university. We'll be much better than you. And I said, all right, can't we do it together? But this was a populist movement, a reaction to change. My list also includes globalization and democracy. Globalization, you know, is the ability for us to grow as a world together with our consumption of products, to share energy from one country to another, to share ideas, to have cars built in Japan and driven in Indonesia or in New York. Globalization brings problems because it's been associated also with exploitation. So the clothes we wear in Europe and the United States are sometimes made in very poorly paid laborers in Bangladesh or even here in Indonesia. The sneakers you wear, the shoes you wear, they're made in China. And the wages are very poor. So globalization brings benefits, but brings consequences. We have to understand both. Democracy. We think democracy is a good thing. You are the third largest democracy in the world. This is a working democracy. You have voting, you have representation, you can remove governments who disappoint you, and you can elect governments that offer you hope. We can as well, but democracy is also problematic. Three things associated with democracy, unfortunately. One is inequality. There are winners and losers. So the people who win the vote, there's lots of people who lose the vote. And there's inequality as a result. We have corruption. Because democracy needs votes, people have ways of winning votes and buying votes and bribing votes. This happens in every democracy. And democracies also have a problem with short-termism. If you have your next election here is 2024. Yeah? 2024? It's only 2 years away. This means that your government will look only at 2024 when it has to go back to win power again. What about 2025? 2026? 2027? These are the vision of a democracy is pulled back into the short term, and this is a problem. We haven't found a better way, and that's a problem. We can't say that let's replace democracy with something else because actually it's probably the best system we have. But it's a system that's not good enough. I've talked about already the Great Power Rivalry. We have also an age now of problems with liberal traditions. Trust, media, leaders, they're problematic. The media is good and bad. Fake news is a reality. What do you believe? And what do you disbelieve? And my last point is the most worrying of all, of course. We still have nations that are spending huge amounts of resources, many billions of dollars on weapons of destruction, of military spending. It will scare you. I get very frightened of the amount of money that is spent on weapons. Every day in Ukraine, we are bombing each other with weapons made in the global marketplace. The total value every day of bombs would completely solve world poverty. Every day, billions of dollars are spent killing each other. So this is what we call a changing human security landscape. That's a technical term. It says what I've described we could spend, of course, a whole semester examining. And what it's done is it's created a changing place. That the world is so much more insecure. But the nature of the new landscape is that there's an interdependence between all the bits I referred to. So the military spending takes place in the largest countries that are rivalrous and is used by smaller countries to promote their interest. There's a real interlinkage and interdependence which is new. The human security framework that the United Nations has is struggling to cope. It tries to make sense of all this and fails. It tries to get everybody together to discuss and is not successful. It tries to introduce universal approaches that leave no one behind. It doesn't just do it for the West or for the North or for the South or for ASEAN or for Africa, but does it for everyone. And we fail. And that's part of the fragmentation, which is a problem for the world as we know it. So let me move on to talk about positive peace. I've spoken about the problems, and I don't apologize. I started my talk by listing all the problems that we face in 2022. So it's my responsibility also to look at what are the things we need to do to address those problems. And I go here to literature on positive peace from Professor Galtung in the States and more recently from the Institute of Economics and Peace in Australia. And this model is quite well tested. It says that there are 8 things we need to do in our world to help us cope with all those terrible negative things that I listed. They're obvious, and if you were to write an essay or an exam question, it would be straightforward. We start with government. We have to have governments that work, that are functioning properly. And by that, we mean they have to be accountable. A government that works properly has to listen to its people, has to be focused on the problems that we've just discussed. We cannot have peace unless we have a successful economy. So we have to have a sound business environment. We have to be looking after ourselves and our nations and our regions by good enterprise. We can't ignore that. The private sector isn't something that happens over there and peace and security over here. It's actually related one to another. If you don't have a job, you're anxious. If you don't have opportunities, you may want to move to another country. These are all related. We need more fairness in the world. It's not fair that tiny numbers of people hold huge amounts of wealth and don't share it. That's not sustainable. You can look at the morality of that, whether it's consistent with your beliefs, your religion, but actually it's not fair, it's not sustainable. When you have those who have and those who have not, you have potential for conflict. At the individual level, at your community level, at your village level, at your nation state level, and whole regional level. When we had the pandemic, the first few months of the pandemic were problematic. because the rich countries had the vaccines and the poor countries didn't. The coronavirus doesn't recognize rich and poor. Everybody's a victim. But the rich countries had the vaccines, and only eventually did they begin to share them, when they realized that everybody needed the vaccine. We still have inequality in vaccine distribution. Very few are vaccinated in the African subcontinent. Very few. Here is great because you have a functioning government that focused on that, and you looked immediately for interdependencies and trade with China, with the Americans, with Moderna, with Pfizer, with AstraZeneca, and you moved quickly. But many countries didn't. And many countries now have debt because they had to pay for the vaccine. Fourthly, we need a world of acceptance. Really important that I have my rights to be who I am, and I must accept your rights. That level of acceptance is a prerequisite of positive peace. And we should have good relations with our neighbors. We might not like them. They may be very local, your own neighbor in your own house, in your own village, or your national neighbor, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, or your international neighbors, because it's only a small world. If we have good relations, these are positive. Doesn't mean you have to like people. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them all the time. But it means you have to be peaceful in your acceptance of the difference. The sixth pillar of positive peace is information. We must have a free flow. No censorship, no secrets. We must be open and transparent. Otherwise, what happens? We get worried about conspiracy theories. If you don't know something, you start guessing the answer and worrying. So this is happening because they're trying to do this. Open information is a fundamental thing. We've got to have high levels of human capital. You're amazing, you guys, because you invest in your education. You work hard to be qualified, not just to get good jobs. I hope you get good jobs too. But because the more you understand, the more you read, the bigger you are as an individual, the more you can contribute. That human capital is a critical investment. We read in some countries that less than 10% of children are in schools. In other countries, no girls are in schools. So human capital is important, and it brings peace. And finally, I've mentioned also corruption. We cannot have a world which is unfair and corrupt. We have to have one that's open and transparent, and above all, accountable. Now, when you list the 8 factors that we need as a world, you see why I get disappointed. You see why I get worried. These are difficult things to achieve consistently everywhere. So we can have a good government in one country and a bad in another. Then we have bad government in the world. We can have good business in one country, weak business in another. We have to have a consistency, and that's why peace is so difficult. So I've talked a lot about the great powers and the big world of change, but let's look more at some of the local security issues that you have. Because we have 2 issues, I think, in emerging threats. The threat that I've described is a global one, but we also have threats at a very local level. The 2 big things that we observe in the academy, the first, the breakdown of law and order. We have rules. Most of our social contracts are that we agree to abide by rules in order to get peaceful relations, in order to get prospects and aspirations for our families. We have rules about how you drive your car, where you can smoke your cigarettes. I hope none of you smoke, by the way. We have rules about the quality of food that we give our children. We have rules about everything. And they're important, as long as they're created by a well-functioning government that listens to its people. But we do find, with globalization, with media, and with corruption at the moment, that we have a breakdown in law and the following of rules. This is a problem. And this has become more of a problem as people become confident as individuals that I will set the rules for me and you can follow the rules of the government. We have a Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, you may have read, Boris Johnson. He's struggling at the moment because he broke his own rules. He set up a rule for the pandemic that said you must stay at home, you must not meet people, you must be careful, you must wear masks. And then he said, well, it doesn't mean I have to. So he went off and had parties. It's a problem. So, and the discussion about that, at least we have a well-functioning government that holds him to account. So they're challenging him. We can do that without being put in prison. The second security threat is, you know very well, is much more sinister. Breakdown in rules, that's about education, it's about reinforcing rules. But some of the impact of transnational organized crime, the problem here is we don't know who is responsible for policing it. Terrorism, corruption, the dark web, cyber insecurity. How do we deal with this when there may be a little blogger sitting somewhere in the other side of the world who you don't know who is emptying your bank account? This is really problematic. So local security problems are not local at all. They're actually international. The transnational crimes that you've been studying, I know you've been discussing in your classes, are even worse. The 21st century has a collection now of problems that you know, from the trafficking of drugs. You grow a drug in one country, you process it, you move it illegally to another, you make profits. Jurisdictions are challenged. We have gun running, weapons trafficking. You know, in the war in Ukraine, one of my colleagues did some research on the war in Ukraine, found out that there were 20,000 mercenary fighters from Syria. There's no fighting in Syria, so the soldiers have got to go somewhere. They can go to Ukraine and fight and be paid. This is a reflection of the transnational nature of criminal behavior. 2 weeks ago I was in Armenia and Azerbaijan. I worked for the United Nations on peace building. You may know that in the Caucasus there was a recent conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over some disputed land. In 2020, in November, there was a war, and Azerbaijan retrieved the land that had been taken by the Armenians 30 years ago. When I went to Shusha, you'll have to look on a map to see that, it's right in the middle of the disputed territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. We had 3 tents. We had 3 tents in the village because there was no buildings left because they'd all been damaged in the war. In the middle tent was the United Nations, and I was one of the experts. On the right-hand side was the Azerbaijan, and on the left-hand side, the Armenians. And we tried to get them to come into the middle. Some of the difficulties were because of transnational activity. The Armenians arrived one morning with a box, and they put the box on the table. And out of the box, they showed me the remnants of munitions, of bombs they'd collected. And these bombs had Israeli writing on them. So these bombs were made in Israel, given to the Azeris. The Azeris had used them on the Armenians, and the Armenians had said, look, these are terrible. These were illegal bombs. The next day, the Azerbaijan side brought a box and put it on the table, they showed the same bombs, but with Russian writing on them, made in the Soviet Union, in the former Soviet Union. So we had Azeris using Israeli bombs, Armenians using Russian bombs, Azeris using Syrian fighters as mercenaries, paid for by the Russians using Kurdish fighters. It's so complicated. And we have to have a discussion that's destroyed by transnational. So who is on which side is impossible to say. Some of these other issues I've just listed here are difficult. Human trafficking, the biggest problem of all, particularly among children who are vulnerable, and also the smuggling of cultural artifacts, which takes place when people take your cultural heritage in order to put it in their museum in New York or London. Transnational crimes are now a very serious part of the overall insecurity that we have. Corruption is probably on the increase. Not probably, definitely on the increase. This is a disease that we have that involves governments, big companies, small communities. Corruption hurts everyone. It's like a pandemic. It's like a virus. But nobody has the vaccination yet. Nobody has the mask that can protect us. Nobody has the answer. It seems okay to be corrupt. We have to look at ourselves about this. I gave a lecture once in New York at the United Nations about corruption. And they were asking me about corruption in Africa, where there's very good records of difficult transactions that take place among some African countries. We have corruption in the UK, I said. They said, no, not in the UK. UK is a very organized rule of law. I said, we have corruption, terrible corruption. If I have a problem with my house, with my water tap, and I ask someone to come and fix it, straightforward transaction. I will recruit a builder who will come and fix my plumbing, yeah? He will say to me, I will charge you $100 to fix your tap, or $200 if you pay me by bank transfer. If you pay me by cash in my hand, $100. If you pay by transfer into my bank, $200. Now, why are there two prices? Because of corruption. If I give him $100, he won't declare it to the taxman. He won't pay tax. If I transfer the money to his bank, there is a record, and he must pay tax. Sometimes that's worth less than $100. We're all guilty of being attracted to find ways that benefit us. And we must remember that corruption starts here, even though it's on a grand scale everywhere else. This is a really big problem, because it doesn't seem to be too serious, does it? Prof Mike paying his plumber in cash is not a world-changing event. But actually it's part of a set of relationships around corruption that we need to consider. We need to find ways of discussing this and changing it. The numbers are huge, by the way, enormous amounts. So my final comment, and thank you for your patience. The new agendas that I've described, the changing relationships at a world power level, and local conditions and transnational crime, means that we have to take control of security. We have to ask the right questions, and I've put a few down here for us to think about. We need to understand who or what might cause us harm. What is the biggest source of threat to you and your family, to you and your nation? It's not an easy answer. You have to examine it. Did we know, for example, that the big global companies, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King, which you know well, the brands, these are a threat to our security? Did we know that? Why? Because the diet that they encourage leads to problems of health. And we're not very good at moderating. Small amounts of McDonald's are fine, but if you eat too many of them, then you have problems. So we have to know what might cause us harm. That requires education. We have to know what advances in science and technology can help. Most corruption can be helped. Most of the illegal activity on the internet can be helped by having a cyber strategy, by having people watching and intervening. Does our government spend enough? Do our universities study enough at monitoring bad behavior through technology? And what tools and methods could we use to protect ourselves better? We have to set a few questions that we're prepared to answer. How could we prepare and respond more effectively? Many governments have been criticized for the pandemic for not being ready. We didn't have masks. We didn't have protective clothing. Next time we'll be better prepared, I hope. In the United Kingdom, in my country, nearly 200,000 people died. This is a very sophisticated and well-developed country, but we lost 200,000 people because we weren't ready. We didn't have enough hospital beds, and you had similar struggles here. How do we invest now in order to avoid things that we don't yet see? It's a challenge. And can we predict what technology will have in the future that will help us with some of these problems? When I arrived in Indonesia a few days ago, last week, I was tested for my temperature at the airport. And this very nice nurse came and took all these details down. That's not going to go away. We'll keep those there now. These will be good protective strategies. Even if we solve the problem of coronavirus, we still need to have that monitoring. Technology can help avoid the pandemic next time. I haven't spent any time this afternoon talking about the environment. It's too big a problem, too big an issue. But the climate is a major source of problem for us, and we have to take seriously. And we're not. Our major insecurity is our own ability to create systems that can help. And we know the health system has failed. The financial system, the meltdown in 2007 and 8 of the banks has failed. Our climate protection system has failed. And our systems of government have also failed. So we have to do better, which is why I'm doing more research on leadership, on how leaders have to step up and look more seriously at some of these issues. Most of the answers come in taking a whole society approach. Have a look at this in your books. A whole society approach is when you don't look at a bit of a problem, you always look at the whole problem. I'll solve this problem and I'll create another difficulty here. And I think we have to work together. Governments, corporates, not-for-profits, communities, whole society working together. If any one part doesn't participate, we cannot be successful. So thank you very much for listening. I've looked at these 5 issues, the emerging threats, the changing landscape. I've looked at positive peace and how difficult it will be to create. And I've looked at some new agendas. Terima kasih banyak. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right, thank you very much, Professor Mike Hardy, for a very enlightening explanations about the current situations that we have, especially when we're talking about global security and also the threats to that. I think while listening to you, then there are 2 things came up to my mind. The first one is that I think is part of the discussions that we have in the classroom too on how globalization with its components on that, including the free flows of movements of money and also the new technology actually creates two opposing results for two parties in relations to transnational crime. The first one is that it is actually empowering the transnational organized crime.
Yeah.
Because they have more than one way to make sure that their operation can be done globally. And the second one, it's actually weakening the law enforcement because that way that they have lots of changes, and at the same time because of democracy and failed state and everything, then they have less fun to fight the transnational crime. And the second one that came to my mind, funnily enough, because I was talking about a British band called Duran Duran. Anyone's here familiar with the band? Besides Miss Candy over there? Okay, so in 1990s, 1994 to be exact, they made a song called Too Much Information. Yeah. And one of the lines of the lyrics says actually, the cola manufacturer is sponsoring the war. So it's just basically in relations to what Professor Mike Hardy mentions about on how big corporation is actually is connected to whatever crisis that we have in the world today. So I think I can open a Q&A session, and then the first term I might just invite three of you to ask question. Please raise your hand. Got one, two, one more. You can ask in Indonesian or English. If you are using Indonesian, I will translate that to English for you. Three, okay. Go ahead, sir.
Me?
Yes. You can stand if you want, introduce yourself,
Thank
and
you.
then state your question.
This we call a first mover. Good.
Okay, good evening, Professor Mike.
Yeah.
My name is Halil. I'm from IR241SP. And I have a question, actually. We've been talking about transnational crime a lot in our classes. And I've been wondering, how do we put an end to those organizations, especially when there's countries or places that gave them leniency, like such as tax evasion stuff, or even like the police, the government doesn't look that way. This doesn't look to the crime in that area or state. How do we exterminate those organizations right into the roots of their organization?
That's a
Thank you.
great first question. Look, one of the biggest problems you have in Indonesia, I know from my colleagues who study maritime insecurity, you have a problem with illegal fishing. Yeah? So you're a very large archipelago with many coastal waters, and other people come and steal your fish. This is a huge trillions of rupiah you lose every year. And the question is, how do we stop that? When I discussed this with the government here in one of the workshops we had, they said to me, "Oh, Professor Mike, we must have more submarines, we must have a bigger navy, and we can then stop the fishing boats coming. These big factory boats that come and suck all the fish out and take them away and lose revenue for Indonesia." So I said, no, you cannot sort the problem in that partial way. You need an international agreement between countries that have a systematic and consistent approach to this crime. So you're absolutely right. The problem with transnational crime is that there is always somewhere where the criminal can be based and be protected. And then he can operate, or she, it's not always men, they can operate from a safe haven. That points to one word, collaboration, or solidarity across the world. And we have a problem as long as we see the world as a series of different countries, instead of having one agreement. Now we have some improvements in ASEAN with a grouping. We have agreements in Europe, but generally speaking, these are not strong. So the answer is the point I made, a whole society, a whole world approach. You cannot solve illegal fishing chasing the fishermen. You have to do it at the next level up. Thank you for your questions. Good.
Thank you for the questions and the answer, Professor Mike. We go to this side. Microphone, please. Oh, okay, go ahead. Sila.
Hi, hello. My name is Sky. I'm also an undergraduate student of international relations. My question is actually quite lengthy. So, as perhaps most of us know, we've witnessed an unprecedented amount of armed conflicts and humanitarian crisis over the recent years in the Middle East and most countries in the African continent. And most of these conflicts are perpetuated by power rivalry. And my question is related to security dilemmas. Humanitarian aid are not delivered fast enough, and they are not delivered efficient enough, devoid of the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council's conflict. This has proven to be a challenge. The question of sovereignty becomes a primary debate. I would really like to hear your point of view in regards to security dilemmas. What are the main problems that are paramount to be discussed? How can we solve security dilemmas issues and deliver peace and security for all? Thank you, Professor Mike Hardy.
Thank you.
Woohoo!
So I was going to put the positive peace one up again, but no worry. We have a problem of global proxy conflicts. So the issue of proxy conflicts is the answer to your question. Most of the conflicts in Africa are about resources that other people want. The problems in the Middle East were about ideology and faith, and the direct response to the terrorist attack on New York was a war in Iraq, which the linkages between those are ridiculous, but nonetheless happened. So I think that great power rivalry and the rivalry over scarce resources means that you have conflicts in local levels which cannot be avoided. And I think the answer is to look at the international organizations to be better. So we have a problem there. The United Nations was formed when? 1947, 48. It was formed with a particular purpose of building a better world after a particular war, the Second World War, which was largely a war of the Northern Hemisphere, largely a war between rival states within Europe, the United States, Russia, Japan. So we built an international organization on that frame, when actually the United Nations is not designed for the sort of answer that you need to your question. So the African were ignored. The Latin Americans were ignored. ASEAN almost totally ignored. China wasn't even featured. These became part of the global community. So I think the answer is we have to look again at the design of international organizations. Now I know your President Jokowi is very, very keen to do this with Indonesia. So this year you have an opportunity with G20, and he will set out. This is a very important country and was going to contribute. It underplays its importance in places like the United Nations, and that won't last for long. I think it's important. We have to change the world map in order to increase the involvement of the emerging countries, Brazil, India, Indonesia. These countries are very significant and must have a stronger voice. Then we will stop the Americans and the Chinese fighting in Africa, or we'll stop the Iranians and the Israelis fighting in the Middle East, and we may have a chance to create the peace and security that your question asked for. Yes, you see, when you look at this slide on positive peace, this is the problem we have. If you take these 8 points and go to West Africa, you'll find a problem. And you ask yourself, why do we have this problem? It's probably because of colonization, the way in which the Northern Hemisphere imposed structures on African countries. They're emerging now. They're having to get their own confidence back. But this is where I'd start. Have we got a United Nations that can do this? Well, we don't. And that's what we need.
Okay, I hope that answered your questions. And then I think the answer to that questions probably will take more years to learn from Professor Mike Hardy. Okay, we got from the, go back to this side again. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
My name is Amar,
Hello, Anga.
and I want to ask about China and Iran. Do you think they are a good role model to Indonesia because they already broke the international rules? For example, like they are making nuclears and many things. Is Indonesia can make nuclear and many things like that? Because what we know, they can become powerful and stronger, and they can interfere the other countries. Thank you.
So it's a very, very good question. But my assessment is this is more complicated than you make out. China and Iran are very different. China is a huge economic power, self-confident, driven by a particular philosophy and political approach which has been unchanged for 100 years, since their revolution. Its confidence has allowed it to be influential in the world, to bring back benefit to its people, billions of people. That's a positive. I don't think it's a good role model. I think everybody thought that as capitalism grew in China, it would become a different place, it would become more democratic. We have many problems with human rights. We have many problems with freedom of expression. And there are all sorts of problems with the suppression of religion and religious beliefs in some parts of China. But it's a confident, important place. Is it a role model? I don't think so. I don't think power comes from force. Power comes from being attractive. You know, there's two kinds of power that you read about. Hard power, which is force. I think the Russians are trying to use hard power now in Europe, and a soft power, which is friendship. The more attractive I am to you, the more powerful I am. And I think the Chinese have tried a bit of both, but mostly they've tried to become attractive. They get their resources from Africa by building roads and bridges and infrastructure. That's a transaction. Now, Iran is very different. Iran is not confident, it's defensive. It's worried about its existence. It's only quite recent a revolution from old times. And it doesn't have friendly relations with its neighborhood. It's very difficult. So the behavior of Iran is the behavior of a defensive nation, not a confident nation. Interestingly, I don't think the United States knows which of those it is. I don't think it's that confident anymore, and I don't think it's that defensive. It's just big and and it's of course 50 states, so it's 50 different places, depending on where you are in the United States. But Iran is defensive. Its nuclear power, its nuclear weapons are to protect it, to say we're big and strong, don't attack us. And that's old speak. Deterrence is what we had in the post-Cold War. In the Cold War. Now it's a different world. If anyone uses a nuclear weapon, we're all finished. Technology is so powerful. I think Indonesia, under your president now, I'm not campaigning for your president. I think it has the opportunity to become an attractive place. It lives with its diversity, it shares its technology, its borders are open. It doesn't seek to impose itself and its views on other states. It recognizes boundaries and borders. It protects. It has many problems, but it is a role model that increasingly the rest of the world is looking at. Better than the confidence of China or the defensiveness of Iran.
Thank you, Professor Mike. You know, I feel really proud being Indonesian, you know.
Hey?
We can be our own role model, actually,
Yeah.
from based on your explanation.
I think so,
Yeah.
in ASEAN, yes, I think so, yeah. You should be confident.
Right, okay. Let me just open for 3 more.
We want some women.
I haven't heard anything from the ladies
Yeah.
here yet. Don't you have any pressing issues on women's rights and everything related to the topic that we have today? We got one.
Good.
Okay. From this side, okay, hold on. From this side, any We got 2. And then any other side? Both sides? Left, right?
We want some gender balance.
Yeah. We need to have gender balance, a balance. Ini, mini, mini, mo. No? Okay, so we got only 2 over time being. Go ahead, miss.
Good afternoon, Professor. My name is Tiara, and I would like to ask a question regarding about corruption. You know, as of lately, there have been rising issues regarding corruption, especially with concerning Indonesia right now. Yeah, but there has been so many rules, regulations, even governmental bodies created to regulate this from happening, to decrease the amount of corruption happening, but it only seems to rise and increase so far. I would like to ask your opinion. Why does this keep happening? And could this be a more deep-rooted issue? Not only is it because of people being money hungry, but maybe because of how people would like to stay in power by having more money. That's all. Thank you.
Sure. Good question. So there's a couple of things about corruption which I believe strongly. Not everybody agrees, of course, but I think that there's no corruption that's good. All corruption is bad. And what it is a bending of the rules, corrupting the rules. This is a word in English that you change things, you corrupt. And it happens at very small levels, and it happens with big corporate levels. Clearly, when it's the government or big corporations, it has a huge impact on many people. But you asked if it's a deep-rooted thing. I think it is. I think it's cultural. I really believe that we've had, since the middle of the 19th century, since the great industrial revolution that led to the manufacturing, mass production, it led to capital and labor. We've built our philosophy in the world on the individual. So individualism has been driven. That is, look after yourself first and your community second. And we have all sorts of rules and regulations to try and help control individualism, but basically individualism encourages you to be corrupt. It says, take advantage for you first, and then worry about your neighbors. So I do think it's deep-rooted, and I think that it's not an easy problem to resolve. I think we can do 2 things that in my experience have shown to be effective. The first is we need to have visibility when we tackle corruption. In the UK, we have agencies, we have special parts of the police, we have government ministries that attack corruption and are held accountable and report about it. You have here too, big organizations, parts of government that are anti-corruption, and they're very important. Visibility, making sure that everybody understands that this is not acceptable. But the second is, I think we have to go back to our schools, to our young people, to our imams, to the mosques, to the churches, and say there's a moral issue here. There's nowhere in the work of the Holy Prophet, in the Quran, that I've read, that tells you it's okay to be corrupt. It's okay to take advantage. In fact, the principles of zakat and waqf are about giving back, about sharing, about taking responsibility for your community in Islam. And the same is true in the Christian religions. So we have to question our morality in our families, in our schools, and we have to have government holding to account the big issues. We have to do both. And this is what I meant about my whole society. We have to do both. And recognize that no corruption, however small, is acceptable.
Okay. Interestingly enough, if I may add, our third Vice President, Adam Malik, actually made a very controversial statement late in the 70s and early 80s that corruption is a part of Indonesian culture. And then everyone was upset at the time, but of course then we still need to work on that and then see how we can just get rid of this bad culture as a part of our identity as Indonesian.
It's part of all our cultures because of individualism, I think.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think we got our last questions from this side. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hello, Professor, and Sarudi. So I have one question. A couple months ago, me and my friends was discussing in the class with Sarudi as well. So in the class, we were talking about transnational crime. How can they empower and cover all of the activity that they do, and also how can they get backup power? And hypothetically, is because they have a really great backup power like the government. So my question, if the government is involved in transnational crime and being striving to cover it up, everything hooked with the transnational crime, and consequently the perpetrator can easier to float organized crime without any obstacles. Hence, how can the government give the belief or rebuilding the trust to the citizens?
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's a really difficult question that you're posing. As normal, those who know me, I don't have all the answers to all the questions. I think about the question and its importance. But you know, most of the problems of corruption are because governments are unable to take control. They're unable to take control because by acting by themselves, they don't have all the tools or the abilities that are necessary. We have an interesting case in the UK at the moment. You've all heard about Amazon, yeah? You know Amazon? It's a big company, a big global company. What does it do? It helps retailers in circulation of books, and it has Amazon Prime, it has Amazon Music, and so forth. It's a very big company. It operates in the United Kingdom just as it operates here. How much tax does Amazon pay in the United Kingdom to the United Kingdom government? It makes a lot of profit. Everybody uses it, but it doesn't pay much tax. And the reason it doesn't pay much tax is because it uses different national countries to shift its income around. So all the profit it makes in the United Kingdom, it declares in Ireland, next country. Why? Because the tax rates in Ireland are lower. It's perfectly legal, so it doesn't make any money in the UK, so it doesn't pay any profit tax. All the profit is made in Ireland. How does it do that? It routes the products through Ireland in order to get them to the United Kingdom, even if they come from the United Kingdom. They go from the UK to Ireland and back in paper. This is legal, and I'm not suggesting that they are illegal, but it's a good example of how transnational crime can only be solved at the level of global institutions, and there lies the problem. Not all national countries are successful enough to agree to universal structures and rules. And if a small country makes a lot of money out of transfer pricing that I've just described, why would it stop? So this is a problem. It cannot be resolved at the local level alone. So thank you for your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Mike Hardy.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. I mean, this is very enlightening opportunities for us to learn from Professor Mike, and I think they got some really good points. Especially, I'm really interested in this, the 8 factors in positive peace, and I think we can just learn more about it later. And I think with that, then I would just like to close this session by thanking Professor Mike Hardy for
You're very welcome.
sharing your knowledge here with us today.
Thank you.
And then also, thank you all. Thank you for participating in this event, and hopefully you learned something, and we will discuss more later in class. And I'm sure that in sessions 11 and 12, then we'll be discussing about international cooperation in combating the transnational crime. So with that, thank you, Professor Mike Hardy, and I give it back to Heidi. Thank you, Heidi.
Heidi.
Please give a round of applause for Professor Mike Hardy and also Dr. Rudy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mike Hardy, for the insightful session and presentations. And also, thank you so much, Dr. Rudy, for moderating the discussion and the Q&A session for this LSPR Omni session. Before we close this event, we would like to thank our honorable speaker, Professor Mike Hardy, of course, for the time and willingness to share with us today about the international crime and global security. To our management and lecturers, and also, of course, to all LSPR students, thank you so much for attending this LSPR sessions today here in Auditorium LSPR Sudirman Park campus. Also, we would like to thank LSPR Media Center team, Faculty of Communication team, Auditorium Technical team, and of course, LSPR International team. This event couldn't be successful without the support of all of you today. Please accept our sincere apologies for any mistakes while presenting this event. Thank you so much, and it has been amazing. I'm Heidi Isabel, signing off for today. Stay healthy, stay safe, and have a nice day ahead. Thank you so much. Okay, we would like to take picture together. Maybe Pak Rudi and Prof Mike can be here in the middle, and then we will take a picture from the stage. Okay. Okay, we will take a picture with Professor Mike Hardy and also Dr. Rudi with all the students. Please give smile and your sign, please. Okay, students. Okay, please give your best smile and best sign in count of the 3. 1, 2, and 3. Gaya bebas, another one. 1, 2, and 3. Smile. Thank you so much for students and also for Professor Mike and Dr. Rudi, and we wish you having a nice day ahead. And thank you so much for attending this LSPR Omni session. Thank you.